Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Harris, and I'm the Massachusetts State Director with the Humane Society of the United States, as well as the Campaign Director for Yes on 3. Question 3 is a modest measure on November's ballot. It would finally establish common sense rules for farm animals, because there are currently no rules regarding how farm animals can be confined. So this will establish common sense protections for farm animals that are suffering some of the worst abuses and protect Massachusetts families from contaminated food. In the absence of rules, there are some within the agribusiness industry that will cut corners and cram animals into cages that are too small for them to move. They can barely turn around or extend their limbs. Consider, for example, a female pig in a pork factory farm. She's locked in a crate essentially the same size as her body. She can take one step forward, one step back. She certainly can't turn around. She's essentially living in a coffin for her entire life. Like your cat or dog at home, pigs are highly intelligent and social animals, and so with no stimulation, she essentially loses her mind. She bites maniacally at the bars in front of her face, often knocking teeth out and drawing blood that stains the concrete at her feet. Eventually, these pigs, they give up hope. They give up. Veterinarians call it learned helplessness, and they just stare through the bars in front of their cage. And imagine if we treated dogs this way. This type of abuse is common in the pork industry, the egg industry, as well as the veal industry. And question 3 would require that products produced or sold in Massachusetts meet this modest animal welfare standard and food safety standard of being sure that they can stand up, lie down, turn around, and extend their limbs. And this measure is also about food safety. A few years ago, a Massachusetts girl was sickened by salmonella. It was an outbreak that was linked to 2 Iowa egg factories. It was an outbreak that sickened an additional 50,000 other Americans. Those facilities were owned by a man named Jack DeCoster. And in a rare instance of a CEO being held accountable, DeCoster was sentenced to jail time. Nonetheless, the Humane Society documented egregious cruelty and food safety threats at another DeCoster facility, this time one closer to home, a facility in Maine that supplies eggs to Massachusetts. They found hens that were forced to live and lay eggs for human consumption on the rotting carcasses of their deceased cage mates. They also found poisoned rats in the cages with hens. Factory farms are incubators for disease due to stressful, overcrowded, and unhygienic conditions. And extensive research shows that these cage facilities have significantly higher rates of salmonella than their cage-free counterparts. Salmonella is the leading cause of food poisoning-related death in America today, which is why the Center for Food Safety and Consumer Federation for America joined more than 100 Massachusetts family farmers and more than 500 Massachusetts veterinarians in endorsing a yes vote on question 3. Our opponents talk about price, and the reality is that study after study shows that it will cost 1 to 2 pennies more to shift to cage-free production rather than using this cruel cage confinement. And that's the reason that some of the most cost-conscious companies out there have already pledged to go 100% cage-free. Dollar General, Dollar Tree, Walmart, Taco Bell, even McDonald's, probably the company that's most known for keeping their prices low. But we don't need to look at what the studies show or what McDonald's is planning to do. We can look at what's actually happened in California, which implemented a similar animal welfare and food safety reform a couple of years ago. And today, the egg prices in California are on par with the national average. And in fact, earlier this summer, they dipped below the national average. The bottom line is that Massachusetts families deserve better than a 2-tiered food safety system where low-income people are more likely to be threatened by substandard, inhumane, and unsafe products. Animals deserve to be able to engage in basic movement. If you agree, please vote yes on question 3.
Thank you. I want to thank our hosts here this evening. I also want to acknowledge I saw a Neighbor to Neighbor t-shirt in the room. I have worked in partnership with Neighbor to Neighbor in Boston for over a decade on working on affordable housing issues, so I'm always happy to see a Neighbor to Neighbor shirt. Oh, I see you back there. All right, and so as we all know, Massachusetts continues to be one of the most expensive states in the country in which to live. While 784,000 of our neighbors rely on public supports to feed themselves and their families, we now have a DC special interest group here in Massachusetts working really hard to steal away affordable choices, our most basic affordable sources of proteins from our plates. Question 3 is in fact a social injustice issue that will victimize low and middle income households across Massachusetts, those who are already struggling to make it work in Massachusetts. According to a Cornell University study, question 3 would create a new $250 million food tax for consumers here in the Commonwealth. This is a new $250 million regulatory tax that would go to out-of-state producers to subsidize housing for their livestock. To put that $250 million in perspective, we spend less than $150 million in our 2 largest housing subsidy programs here in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program and state-funded public housing. We spend less than $150 million each year on those 2 programs combined. This is a $250 million tax in the first year to send to out-of-state producers for them to subsidize housing for their livestock. Question 3 supporters, as you've heard, will tell you that the economic impact of question 3 is a mere penny an egg, while they conveniently seem to overlook some very key factors. And I just wanted to show you, you can go into your local grocery store, and you will see already the price difference between a dozen of conventional eggs and cage-free eggs. This is from my local grocery store out in Eastern Mass, $1.19 for a dozen. Conventional eggs, $3.49 for a dozen of cage-free eggs. The price difference is already there. My opponents will also ignore the fallout that actually happened in California. These are headlines that came out of California when a similar law was passed, and they also conveniently ignore information and data that comes every day in a report from the USDA it shows that consistently the price of eggs in California are double that than they are across the rest of the country. I can't ignore the facts. I've been doing this work for about 14 years, and I can't ignore the fact that my opponents, and when I say this work, anti-poverty work, social justice work, I came to this work through my own experience with hunger, poverty, and homelessness. That's what drives me. And, you know, it's interesting and quite ironic that the Humane Society of the United States has worked to actually kill a current piece of legislation that would create a livestock care and standards board that would address confinement for all livestock in Massachusetts, not just the 3 animals that they've selected to talk about here in question 3. And my personal experience with poverty and professional work and policy has shown me that when we start to seek out problems that don't exist, and this is a non-issue for Massachusetts, I'll tell you, there's 1 farm that would be impacted. When we start to solve for problems that don't exist, there will be unintended consequences, and more often than not, poor people will suffer those consequences. My opponents have called me a pawn for big agriculture, and let me make something clear. My work in social injustice, against social injustice, is well documented. If anything, they're looking to you as a pawn in their agenda to further their national agenda. I assure you of that. I am nobody's pawn. They have also suggested that my being here in this debate somehow suggests that low-income people do not care about animals, and that is ludicrous. I am asking Massachusetts voters to vote a resounding no on question 3 because our elders, our disabled, and our struggling families cannot afford a new $250 million food tax. Please vote no on 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Are there questions from the floor? So the question is, and I'll ask you to both come forward, is the increase in taxes going, or just first?
You want me to ask?
Nope. Is the increase in taxes ongoing, or just first year to subsidize startup costs?
So to clarify, there is no tax associated with this measure. The Cornell study that's referenced is a study that was funded by opponents to question 3. When you look at the studies that are out there, there are more than a dozen egg industry studies that show that the shift from cages, cruel cages, to cage-free housing is only 1 to 2 pennies an egg. And there is a study out of Iowa, so the middle of pork country, that shows that it can actually be 11% cheaper to use group housing rather than to use these cruel gestation crates where the animals can't turn around. I'm very proud to work for the Humane Society of the United States, and I'm very lucky to work with a very diverse coalition that includes other animal welfare organizations like the MSPCA, but also Dakin Humane Society here in Springfield, the Massachusetts Sierra Club, so many veterinarians, faith leaders, and farmers who know that farm animals deserve to be able to engage in basic movement. Our opponents are funded by the agribusiness industry, which has shown time and time again that they don't care about the welfare of animals, and they also don't care about the safety of families that are threatened by these substandard and unsafe products. My opponent's Diane has a really tough job. She has to defend what most of us would consider indefensible, which is the lifelong immobilization of animals in cages. So the smart approach is to make people think that this measure is about something that it's not. But this measure is really simple. It's about giving breeding pigs, egg-laying hens, and calves raised for veal enough space to stand up, lie down, turn around, and extend their limbs. It's really that modest.
Thank you. Yes, the $250 million sort of this hidden regulatory tax is in the first year alone, and we can still look to the USDA data from California that still, nearly 2 years later, show that their egg prices remain double that which they are across the rest of the country. And I've actually had the opportunity to visit this one farm that is being vilified just about an hour north of here. There are 3,000 hens, not crammed into cages, as my opponents will have you believe. They are one hen per cage. And when we talk about food safety, I just want to sort of give you a visual. For those that haven't had the opportunity to go and visit a farm, when hens are in cages, their waste, their manure drops below them, okay? They lay an egg, and the egg rolls off to the side. The two do not commingle. So if you want to talk about food safety, after seeing what I've seen, I will never, despite the fact that it's something that me and my family cannot afford, for safety reasons, I'm not purchasing a cage-free egg. I do not want the manure commingling in with the egg that I'm going to consume. And, you know, my opponents will reference the 100 family farms that support Yes on 3. The question 3 is opposed by the Massachusetts Farm Bureau Federation with its 6,000 or with their 6,000 members, and the Massachusetts Veterinary Medical Association has also expressed concern because of the impact that question 3 could actually have on the farm animals themselves. And to quickly, I visited with a local farmer in my area who was pressured by some animal rights groups to go cage-free, and he lamented, as he showed me, first of all, a stack of hate mail that was pressuring him to go cage-free. And he said, listen, I can't afford to have picketers and protests outside of my farm where I sell direct to my consumers. And then he showed me a stack of his dead hens, while his mortality rate went from 1% to 10 to 15% every year, because hens are naturally aggressive and they start to display that natural behavior. There's a thing called the pecking order for a reason. It comes from hens. They don't like each other. They are known to, they at certain times of the season they'll participate, they're cannibalists. So if it's not good for the people, it's a $250 million food tax. It's not good for the hens. It's not good for the farmers. It's not good for Massachusetts. We do not need to be bankrolling the rest of the country to go to cage-free production. Please vote no on 3.
Are there any other questions before we go into questions that came through other means? Well, you've both done such a great job. So here's one question. Please share, each of you, 3 things that we all gathered here tonight need to know. 3 really concisely, so then we're sitting around the table, we're going for our walk and talks with other voters. What do we need to know from both sides of the coin here?
It's important to know that there are thousands of hens here in Massachusetts that can't spread their wings without touching the sides of their cages, and that across the country and around the world, these animals are crammed into spaces that are so small that they can't turn around or extend their limbs, and that is cruel. If you imagine putting a cat or a dog in those types of circumstances, You know, if one of our endorsing shelters did that, they'd be hauled off because that's cruel and inhumane treatment. It's important to know that Massachusetts families, regardless of their socioeconomic status, deserve protection from these food safety threats that are associated with these cruel cage facilities. And it's important to know that Massachusetts farmers overwhelmingly support this measure, that they're already overwhelmingly doing the right thing. Massachusetts farmers know that responsible farming includes husbandry for these animals, and that that basic husbandry includes allowing the animals to engage in basic movement. And better conditions for farm animals also means better conditions for workers, which is why the United Farm Workers has endorsed this ballot measure.
One, question 3 was intentionally misleading. It is going to ask you, do you want to prevent cruelty to animals? And naturally and instinctively, you want to say yes. There was nothing written in there about this $250 million tax. It was intentionally misleading. 2, this is the money coming to support a yes on 3 vote is coming from outside of our state. It's coming from places like California, New York, and most certainly from special interest groups in DC. And 3, I just want to, there have been, I've struggled in and out of poverty for my entire life, and I think I'm well qualified to speak on behalf of my family and other families like mine. And I know that right now there are families who are not able to feed their children tonight, and that's the truth. And I've been in that situation more times than I choose to even recall, and I've been able to scrounge up $1 worth of change, go to the grocery store, purchase a dozen eggs, and at least be able to provide my children with a source of protein for them to go to sleep on. So, we've got to remember this. We have got to remember the health and safety of families, and we have to reject this $250 million food tax. Thank you. I keep taking your things, I think. Do I? No,
You're good.
All right.
I got it. Are we on time? Okay. So another question is, what other programs, because if we're talking about the cost that's associated with this piece of legislation, like what programs are there to support farmers or businesses that sign on?
So I believe the ASPCA has some grants to help farms transition from cages to cage-free conditions. But it's important to note that cages, like any other equipment on a farm, has a lifespan. So they depreciate over time. And so the farm in Massachusetts bought their cages, I think about a decade or if not more ago, and they bought them secondhand. So these cages would have to be replaced anyway. And this measure has a phase-in period. It wouldn't take effect until 2022. So there's plenty of time for these cages to depreciate in value and to shift the production method. It's also important to note that already every other egg farmer in Massachusetts is using cage-free conditions or higher welfare standards. This is one farm in Massachusetts that's left doing it. If smaller farms can do it, bigger farms can do it, they certainly can do it as well. And if this is something that McDonald's can do, Taco Bell can do, Walmart can do, this is certainly something that Massachusetts can do. It's important for Massachusetts families to have food that's not only affordable, but responsibly produced.
Sure. So just a note that, first of all, 90% of us at the grocery store are actually purchasing conventional eggs as opposed to cage-free egg, largely due to that cost. And I'm sorry, what was the question itself? Oh, the programs. So I think Stephanie covered that. There is only one farm that would be impacted, probably for less than 20% of what the Yes on 3 campaign is spending here in Massachusetts, could have converted that farm. If that farm was the concern, they could have helped that farm out to go cage-free. And then just a couple of other increased costs that haven't been addressed anywhere is the WIC program. Eggs are a huge part of the WIC program. That is a federally funded program, but $12 million is spent by the state here in Massachusetts. What does that mean for the WIC program? Schools that serve eggs. What does that mean for them? Nursing homes that serve eggs. None of this. There has been no cost analysis by the proponents of question 3 on what this actual cost would be. And as you'll hear, they'll downplay the penny an egg. Please vote no on 3.